All right, guys, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. It is 2 o'clock, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time today. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Just a couple of quick housekeeping notes. I want to let you know that we are recording the webinar. So if for some reason you need to jump off at any time, I totally understand. But we will have this recorded, so you can always come back to the webinar on YouTube and watch it again. And also, I will be sending out the PDF version of the slides of the presentation, so you can have those to review at any time as well. If anybody cannot hear me well, or if you cannot hear me, if you can please just put a note in the chat box below. Or if you have questions, I will do my best to keep an eye out for questions and try my best to reply to them. If for some reason I don't get to your question, or if I don't know the answer, I will absolutely research it and get back to you as soon as I can. And with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, and just to make sure everybody can see my screen, the first slide we have here is what is a MHAA Project Grant. So if for some reason you're not seeing that, if you'll just shoot me a quick message, but we're going to go ahead and get started on the presentation. So what is an MHAA Project Grant? I know a lot of you are familiar with the program, but just a brief overview of a project grant. This is through the Maryland Heritage Areas Program, and it is a dollar-for-dollar matching grant, meaning that for every dollar you request for grant funds, you must match those funds with up to 75% minimum cash and a maximum of 25% in-kind services. And those can be donations, those can be in-kind services, consultations, etc. Also, volunteer can be there as well. The grant projects themselves can be either capital or non-capital projects, and I'll go into much more detail about that as well. And the grants can support projects involving historical, cultural, or natural resources, sites, events, and facilities. So this is just kind of a brief overview of what the project grant is and entails. And I think another most important component of the program itself is that they must have a heritage tourism component or contribute to research that will directly inform a heritage tourism product. So that's just something that you would definitely want to keep in mind as you are exploring project ideas. I also have on here a couple of important dates to remember. The intent to apply deadline is January 27th, 2018. The intent to apply is simply that you are just submitting a brief intention that you are going to apply for the full application. And I'll go into a lot more detail about that here in a few slides. The full application deadline is March 6th of 2018. The awards are announced in early July. The grant agreement corporate resolution draft in completion is typically in the fall timeframe. This will depend early fall, late fall, based on all of your information being submitted and completed in a quick and efficient amount of time. The first disbursement is estimated late fall, winter 2018-2019. Again, your first disbursement will depend upon, of course, their scheduling on their end. They have over 100 grant agreements that they are drafting at the same time. So that also is a factor in delivery, as well as how quickly you return your grant agreement signed, as well as your corporate resolution. So is your organization eligible to apply? I think this is another important question. Because applicants must be either a nonprofit organization or a local jurisdiction. They can also be a state or a federal government agency. If you are not one of these, it's possible that you could partner with another nonprofit organization or local jurisdiction. That would be something that you would have to contact those folks on your own to determine if a project would be a partnership-based application. And applicants must be in good standing with the State of Maryland Department of Assessments and Taxation, so SDAT for short. So one of the questions is your organization, are you even familiar with that? I do have a great little link here that you can click on, and I'll send this in the slides as well so you can easily access that. But I wanted to show you really briefly. So this is the main screen for the Business Express search. So you can, or entity search, you can type in your business name or ID and search that here to see your status currently, which is a great feature. If you have any questions or problems with that, you can certainly contact the State of Maryland to assist with that as well. There's contact information at the bottom of the screen as well. Alrighty, so let's get back here. Eligible activities must take place within the boundaries of a heritage area. So there are 13 certified heritage areas in Maryland. Of course, ours is the Mountain Maryland Gateway to the West Heritage Area. And to check to see if your project is within our heritage boundaries, there's a great resource through the Maryland Historical Trust website. And I'll briefly go there as well so you can see that. What's really nice is they have a layer on their Medusa website, is what it's called for short. So as you come in here, your screen, you need to zoom in enough to where it shows Garrett County. Go to Layers over on the left-hand side, click Other, and then make sure Maryland Heritage Areas is selected. I like to click off of the other layers so that I can see it specifically. You'll see these kind of light purplish striped areas. That will indicate a heritage area boundary. As long as your project is within those boundaries, you're good to go. If part of your project is outside of the boundaries, but a majority is within the boundaries, you're fine. If it is a majority of it outside of the boundaries with just a small portion in, that will be a question we would need to talk about with the MHAA folks before we could proceed. And also you want to talk to me and we can look at it together. Going back to the presentation, another great resource that you definitely want to ensure that you are looking at whenever you are planning your projects, whenever you're looking at your application, is the Heritage Area Management Plan. Projects must be consistent with the goals, objectives, and strategies outlined in the management plan. So a great resource we have is online on the Garrett Heritage website. You can easily log on and go directly to our management plan, which is under the News and Grants tab on the right-hand side, and Management Plan. Here you will find links to all of the different sections of the management plan, as well as a full management plan link. Now, I will warn you that this does take several minutes to download because it is large. If you have a slower connection, I would recommend potentially downloading them piece by piece, just because it won't take as long for you. These are great resources, and a really great suggestion is if you are looking at a particular piece of the PDF, you can hit Control F and search for keywords that you're specifically looking for. So if you know you're looking for keywords, say transportation, if you hit Control F, type in transportation, you can actually specifically select those words within the document so you can easily find them. Also, we have links to our FY18 annual work plan and our 5-year action plan. So if your project fits within those particular locations, you can also make that indication in your application as well. Okay, going back here to our presentation here. Oops, getting in Photoshop for you guys.
Yeah.
Okay, so going a little bit deeper into projects that are that the MHAA program permits. They do allow both non-capital and capital. If you are interested in a capital project or a non-capital project, non-capital can go up to $50,000 in request. Capital projects can go up to $100,000. So just to kind of briefly overview a non-capital project, this can be planning, interpretation, or programming. So things like interpretive exhibits, signage, brochures, educational programs, or programming such as seminars, performances, reenactments, and festivals. Those are definitely things to consider. Planning projects would be more research, planning studies, things that would support the heritage area. Something to consider, though, when you're looking at programming for events and festivals, a lot of times these are annual events and festivals, and you want to be considering when you're applying that the grant reviewing teams are looking for projects that are new or expanded events. So if you're looking to add a new component or expanding your event, that's what they're going to be most interested in. Or if it's a commemoration, if it's a one-time event, things of that nature are going to be looked upon favorably compared to annual events that you're just looking to fund year after year. Another thing to consider when you're looking at these types of projects is marketing of them. So marketing such as brochures and advertising and things of that nature must be used in your match only. They cannot be used for state funds. So just keeping in mind as you're preparing your budget, that would be something you would want to take into consideration. Okay. Moving on to capital projects. So capital projects may not exceed $100,000 in ask and can be acquisition, development, rehabilitation, restoration, or pre-development. And of course, what we always kind of consider when we think what's the difference between capital and non-capital, think of capital projects as your brick and mortar projects, things that are going to be building, construction, the restoration, rehabilitation. Those are definitely what you want to consider whenever you have those types. If anybody is has their location not muted, if you can please mute yourself, that would be great, just so that we're getting a little bit of feedback from a couple people. If anybody wouldn't mind doing that, that would be great. Okay, so acquisition. If you are looking to purchase a property, this would be this would fall along capital project as well as development. So pre-development and development, if you're looking for plans, architectural design, engineering, those are also considered capital projects. New construction as well as rehabilitation. So for example, if you're looking to construct a heritage tourism site, such as a visitor center and whatnot, that would still be considered a development project because it is a new construction. So the other things you want to keep in mind, and this goes into a little bit more detail, up to 50% of the average of an acquisition, 2 appraisals of the subject property must be included. Now, in terms of historical and basically rehabilitation restoration, you want to ensure that you are working with a contractor that has experience with historic properties. That is something that will be considered as your application is reviewed. You want to research materials that are best to protect assets that are reputable. For example, if you're a museum and you're looking to install new equipment, HVAC or the like, you definitely want to make sure that they are museum quality, that they are looking to protect any of the installations and artifacts that are there. Also want to consider ADA compliance, as well as if the project will cause ground disturbances. So that's certainly something to consider as well. Also, in terms of construction, things like memorials tend to not be super competitive. However, there is a caveat to that. If there is a significant interpretive component, that is something that would be considered. So for example, if you're looking to do a memorial that has a lot of interpretive information, a lot of interpretive panels, information about the history, that certainly will be looked upon more favorably. However, I certainly don't want to discourage anyone. Certainly we would want to talk about that as well. Okay. Let's move on to the next slide here. So looking at the Maryland Heritage Area program goals, just kind of keeping this in mind as you're starting to craft your projects ideas. Want to enhance visitor appeal and enjoyment of the state's history, culture, natural environment, and scenic beauty. So in other words, you're enhancing a visitor's experience. Also, increasing economic activity for tourism and creating opportunities for small business development, job growth, and a stronger tax base. Encouraging preservation and adaptive reuse of buildings, conservation, and also the continuity and authenticity of cultural arts, heritage attractions, and regional traditions. And want to balance the tourism impact as well as local residents' quality of life. So this is just a little brief overview. You can certainly go over the full list of the MHAA program goals, and I have a link on here for you as well if you're interested in examining this a little bit further. Okay, so the Mountain Maryland Gateway to the West Heritage Area program goals, we have 4 major goals, and that includes establishing the management structure for the heritage area, which has been done on the internal side, but for what you guys are looking for, preserving, protecting, and promoting our heritage resources, raising public awareness about our history, culture, and resources, increasing economic development related to heritage tourism in Garrett County, and also that ties into essentially the small business component that the Maryland Heritage Areas goal is also mentioning as well. So for more detailed information about our goals, goes into a lot more detail about each one. You can certainly click on the management plan on our website to give you a little bit more of a detailed look at what those goals are. Okay, so let's dive in. After we're kind of getting over the nitty-gritty of the program itself, let's look more at projects. Let's look more at what makes a compelling project and what makes a strong application. So just kind of looking a little bit about what makes the projects fitting into a mold. You know, certainly we really want people to look at projects not as just a way to have another source of funding. You don't want to try to force a project into the heritage mold to just apply for the funding. You know, it's certainly something that will feel authentic, and grant reviewers really want to feel, you know, kind of genuinity and authenticness with your projects. So really, it should feel easily speaking to our goals and our themes within the heritage area. So if you're not feeling like it's going to quite fit, it probably won't rank well. So that's definitely something to consider as you're looking to make your project applications. So let's dive a little bit into our themes. We have 4 themes under our overarching theme, which of course is the Gateway to the West theme. And again, this is basically our Garrett County's relationship to the opening of the development of America's Western frontier. So before there was St. Louis, we essentially were that gateway to the West, especially with the addition of the National Road. In addition, we also tie closely into the transportation theme, as you'll see in our sub-themes here as well. So let's talk about historic transportation. Projects that tie into the historic National Road, trails, railroad paths. In addition, you know, the train station, our Castleman River Bridge, other forms of transportation as well, that absolutely fits within our historic transportation themes. Now, doesn't mean you have to be a site that's located directly at the Castleman River Bridge or, for example, at the train station. Certainly not. It can be different projects that feed into those themes. So certainly don't take this verbatim word for word. However, the feeling and the connection to this theme would certainly be well-versed as well. Moving on to historic recreation. So we're talking more about a lot of different things. This ties into our history with quote unquote celebrities coming to our area, U.S. presidents and prominent American figures, the vagabonds coming to the area, Grover Cleveland having his new bride and him coming up for their honeymoon. So talking about the early days of folks escaping the cities, coming to the area via train. In addition, Mountain Lake Park's Chautauqua, that's another really great tie-in to that. And of course, Deep Creek Lake in the surrounding area, Wisp Resort. These are all ties to our historic recreation. And again, these are things that can be tied in many different ways, but just kind of give you a sense of where that theme came from. And cultural uniqueness. So, the themes I feel are nicely, some are a little bit more specific, but some are a little more broad. Cultural uniqueness, I believe, ties into a little bit more of our broad cultural sense in the area. It really can tie into things as general as our Appalachian food and drink and music, as well as our interest for our Appalachian Forest Heritage Area roots. So that can be our trails and our forests. It can also be barn quilts and agriculture and our artisans, for example, throughout the county, Spruce Forest Artisan Village, the Drain House, things of that nature. So again, these are impactful both today as well as preserving traditions of the artisans who have kind of impacted the way we do art here currently. Okay, man and nature. So man and nature really kind of ties back into a lot of our unique natural resources. So whether you're looking at coal, whether you're looking at our state parks, whether you're looking at Cranesville Swamp, for example, this also ties into cultural roots in terms of the agricultural legacy, especially for the Amish and Mennonite communities. And this can also be tied into farmland specifically, or whether it's, about location-wise, if you're looking at farmers markets and things like that. So it really, again, a broader category that can tie into many different types of projects. Okay, so what I wanted to dive into next, looking a little bit about some of our past project examples. This is a very small selection of some of the past projects that have been funded, but I certainly wanted just to give you a little bit of an idea as you are, crafting your projects and you're creating and you're brainstorming what might make an interesting project. This is just kind of to spur some creativity in you. So two of our most recent projects are the Friendsville Interactive History Tour and the Meadow Mountain Trail Heritage Phase, I should say. So the Friendsville Interactive History Tour ties into both tangible physical assets in the town as well as an online interactive component. So folks who are in the town can come to a kiosk location at the parking area. They can park and walk, or you can drive to the different sites. And each site is tied to an online component, whether it be a video or photographs. So a really, really great website, as well as if you go on to visitfriendsville.org, you can find the history tour online so you can see a little bit more information about that. In addition, the Meadow Mountain Trail Heritage Phase. So the Heritage Phase is being completed currently. The trail construction itself has just been completed. However, they are working currently on some Native American interpretive panels that will go along the Heritage Phase. So tying in again, because a heritage area really is comprised of pockets of assets and linkages that connect those assets, trail systems are a prime example of one of those linkages. So whether it be water trail or mountain trail, such as the Meadow Mountain Trail system, that really speaks to those linkages between those pockets of assets. So now you can, of course, go on the Meadow Mountain Trail at this point. They are still currently working on finishing the interpretive panels, but this would be a great resource to tap into, going up to the trail and taking a look at their interpretive panels as well. Okay, let's go on to the next examples here. So a couple of examples that have been past examples, including the Castleman Bridge Bicentennial. We spoke a little bit about kind of these semi-annual activities and whatnot. The Bicentennial obviously is kind of a once-in-a-lifetime celebration. So this is a great concept of a festival or event that is a mile marker. And the event was over a couple days. There were presentations, in addition to the ribbon cutting of the bridge itself, luminaries and everything. So this is a great example of a project that had been done in event style. On the right is the transportation mural panels. If you've never been to the back side of the Transportation Museum, these panels this doesn't even capture the size of them. They're massive panels that were constructed, but give a little bit of a history of the towns, the lake, the museum itself. And as well, there's a beautiful little sitting area out back too that's just a really phenomenal asset. So it really brings together both a history component, an art component, and an architectural component to the structure that maybe you would never even consider, but when you're driving down 2nd Street or walking down behind the building, you have another tie to this particular location, draws you into the museum to come and visit even closer. So I think that's a really great example. In addition, we recently completed the Visitor Center photo display, which is located here at the Garrett County Visitor Center down in McHenry. So the photographs that you see over here on the left, all of these are individual plexiglass panels that are lit from behind. Each of these particular pictures before were quite faded. We estimate that those were, along with the structure of the building, about 15 years ago now. And these photos were all selected based on historical shots. You can see some black and white shots are in here, as well as modern day shots of historical assets. And in addition, some have the current day photos as well as the historic shots inlaid. And reason for that is some of them were not high enough resolution to have a really strong quality photograph that was too large. In addition, before there were not captions of each of the photographs. So if a visitor was coming into the center, they may not know exactly what that photograph was representing or where it was. Now each image has a caption along with it, so you can really tie in the picture to a location or to a time frame or to a construction of when a site was erected. So really cool story. We tied that into our 5-year anniversary celebration, the unveiling of this project, and I'm really proud of it. The asset to both visitors and for residents who come into the center, either for meetings or just to explore. It's a really, really cool asset there. In addition, the Garrett County barn quilts, I'm not sure if everybody, whoops, sorry, I'm getting a little click happy there. I'm not sure if everybody's familiar with the barn quilts, but in the area we have over 40 barn quilts that each have a unique story behind them, a unique owner, as well as a unique story. So the Garrett County Barn Quilts website is fantastic. And in turn, you can actually download our free mobile app from Garrett Heritage on both Android and Apple products, and it's free. And one of the really cool tours, I believe, is that you can actually do a tour of all the barn quilts in the area. It gives you the story behind them, their map location, so you can kind of make a little bit of a tour around it as well. So it was a really great partnership to work with the Garrett County Barn Quilts to not only display the quilts themselves and part of their project, and now coming full circle, being able to promote them with our mobile heritage app as well. And in addition, I should mention that the interactive history tour we've also added to our mobile app, so that if you are looking for both the interactive functionality from their website as well as a mobile functioning tour site, you can use a combination of the two. And we link directly to their YouTube videos and to their sites so that you can have more information as well. All right. Okay, so I just wanted to give also, this is, of course, touching on local Garrett County projects, but I also wanted to give some examples of other heritage area projects that were funded in the last fiscal year, this current fiscal year, I should say. Some capital projects that were constructed, were awarded, that will be constructed or restored is, for example, the Edna E. Lockwood, which is a restoration from the Chesapeake Bay Maritime Museum, the Pride of Baltimore, the Glen Echo Park Carousel, and the packing house smokestack stabilization. So these just give you a kind of an example of that capital style project, restorations, rehabilitations, and things of that nature. Non-capital projects. So on the other side of the coin, looking at what wayfinding and access projects. So for example, Montgomery County is doing something like this. So this can be signage, it can be a ways to communicate with visitors and residents, basically, again, wayfinding, the way to access resources. In addition to that, for example, exhibits. So exhibits are a big piece of a non-capital project. So for example, the Historical Society of Frederick County is doing an history activities exhibit room. And in addition, the History of Annapolis and 99 Objects exhibit is in development through Historic Annapolis. And then as another example, Ellicott City, again, with all the devastating flooding they received on some of their main street, well, most of their main street, I should say, they are working on a heritage guide and tear-off map through the Ellicott City Historic District Partnership. So this, I think, also not only gives you an example of different projects that were awarded, but also shows a little bit about who is applying and potential some thoughts of who may apply. And it doesn't always have to be a museum or a historic district themselves. It has a little bit of a tie to other folks as well. Okay, so what makes a strong application? I wanted to go over this because, as you're thinking, obviously the brainstorming and tying it to a heritage theme is most important. But then once you think you really are ready to make an application, this is where I wanted to kind of talk about what makes a strong application. I think one of the most important things is a clearly defined project. When you're thinking of, these applications, they have a lot of different questions. There's a lot of different questions that have answers that sound similar, but just definitely being clear about what your project goals are and how those will be completed if you have the means to complete them, and timeliness. So again, as I mentioned, strong ties to the heritage area theme, management plan, 5-year plan, and or annual work plan is critical. Projects that have necessary expenditures outlined and the budget is broken down in detail. So the grant reviewers are looking for projects that, are being, the awardees are being prudent with their grant funds. They want to see that the outline is for necessary expenditures only, and then in the budget that those are broken down in detail. You're not just saying that, okay, we need $50,000 and that's going to this exhibit. Well, no, you want to actually describe that more in line with, okay, so it's going to cost $5,000 for the company to construct. It's going to cost X amount of dollars for the piece to be installed, et cetera, et cetera. So you just want to make sure that you're detailed in your budget. You also want to include the lifespan of the project, and it's well defined. Something that people don't consider are the ongoing costs and maintenance. That is something that they will want to know. How will that be maintained? If you're doing a display, and obviously things like that deteriorate over time, who will be taking care of any maintenance that needs to be completed on that particular project? Also, are the outcomes of your project measurable? So if you're looking at, for example, an exhibit, are you looking at how you can measure the positive successes of that? So, for example, are you measuring how many people are viewing an exhibit, or how many people have, for example, visited your website and looked at that particular exhibit online, etc.? So there are different ways to prove measurability, but definitely something to consider as you are moving forward with an application. Another one is really important, are realistic timelines and being ready to complete your project. So, if you've got this large project and you say, okay, we can get this done in half a year, well, it may not be realistic. So be considering what your realistic timelines are and if you're ready to begin now. The other thing that I think is really interesting, obviously not all projects are what we consider quote unquote urgent, meaning if we don't stabilize this building, it's going to fall down now. Well, that not only is urgent, but it's also an emergency. So what we consider urgency, what I would consider urgency when you're looking at projects is, why must they be completed now? Is it because a commemoration is happening and it only happens obviously in 1 year and that needs to be completed? Or if that project doesn't happen, something in the future may not be able to be completed, a different phase of a project, for an example. Also, again, I touched on this before, but the application, you want to make sure you consider provisions for individuals with disabilities. And for an example, of course, ADA compliance is very important to consider. You also want to have an explanation of how the project will be marketed. Now, again, actual marketing dollars for branding or logos, advertising, etc., can only be used as match. But the grant reviewers will want to know how you will be marketing the project to potential visitors as well as residents and stakeholders. Also, just something, again, minor, but so important, you want to make sure that your scope of work and your budget line items match. So many times the applications will come in and the scope of work will say, well, this is going to be $50,000, but when you look at the budget breakdown, it doesn't come out to $50,000. So just, again, something small but very crucial is to make sure that your scope of work and budget items match together. Also, something to definitely be considerate of, and also to, if this is a question, this will definitely be something to make sure you have in hand, which is match funds. We want to have documentation of match funds that are in hand or in process. And what that means is that if you don't have the match funds in hand at this moment, that you will have documentation that you have those funds in hand by June 15th. So just because you don't have them in your hands at this immediate moment doesn't mean that you'll necessarily not be awarded, but indicating that you will have documentation in hand by June 15th, that is extremely important. Okay. So let's talk about if you're ready to apply. There are definitely a couple of things to keep in mind. The Project Grant program is very competitive. There are 13 heritage areas, and we typically receive over 100 applications between all 13 heritage areas. So as you can see, with 13 heritage areas, over 100 applications, and with our funding cap at just under $3 million, only about 50 projects are awarded. So it's very important, again, that your project is tied strongly to our heritage area themes, that all of those things we've talked about today really, really matter in terms of making your application competitive. Also, I just want to make you aware to be prepared to complete the full application. It is a lengthy application. There are many questions, and the thought process is you have your intent to apply due at the end of January, and then your full application is due in March. So you do have a couple of months, about a month and a half, really, when all is said and done. So starting now, looking at it is a great way to kind of get your ducks in a row and be ready to complete that full applications. As we talked about before, being clear and concise in your responses. The reviewers have, again, over 100 applications to review. So really being clear, concise with your responses is very, very important, and will be, certainly appreciated on the reviewer's end as well. Also, something that's really important, and I certainly want to stress to everybody who is listening to this webinar today, the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority is offering several in-person workshops and grant webinars in January that will focus more on the detail about applying and administering a project grant. If you plan to apply, or you're even considering about applying, you definitely want to attend at least one of these opportunities. And luckily this year we do have a Western Maryland workshop that's going to be held in Hagerstown at the Spring Hill Suites, and that's going to be on Tuesday, January 9th from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. if you can attend, I strongly recommend it. Now, Jen Ruffner of the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority also offers webinars. She's fantastic and goes over things in great detail. We're talking about more pre-work on your application. She'll be talking more on the logistics and the technical aspects of your application, and it's very important to attend. So something I want to mention, if you're thinking about potentially applying, there are so many things to consider. However, if you're even considering applying, if you're not sure, you really don't know yet, you're not sure about whether you can get a match, I always recommend you to submit an intent to apply. This does not obligate you to complete a full application, but you have to submit an intent to apply in order to complete a full application. You are in no way held to that. So if, for example, you submit an intent to apply in January and then you find out in February that unfortunately the project's not going to be able to come to fruition in the timeline you thought, or match isn't going to happen, etc., you can certainly at that point drop out, and there's nothing to worry about there. You can do that. And I absolutely really ask that you contact me to discuss any project ideas. We can talk about feedback, recommendations. I can even try to kind of relay any suggestions I can have to help you as much as I possibly can to make your application strong. On that note, let's talk a little bit more detail about your pre-application considerations. We've touched on a lot of these before, but just kind of reiterating some of those. Just a little checklist. Okay, so you want to make sure your project is within your heritage area boundaries, number one. You want to make sure your organization is in good standing with the SSTAT. If your project is capital, you want to make sure that you've, of course, been in contact with a property owner, making sure they're agreeing to convey an easement, and also giving permission to complete the project. And then, of course, going into property acquisition, that you have at least one appraisal within the last 6 months. And if it's currently an easement property, that you've already begun the process of obtaining easement approval. Again, going back to budget and match, just want to make sure you're considering the following. I understand the match is a 1-to-1. Has to be a minimum of 75 cash and 25% in-kind max, that your matches in hand are committed, and if not, will be by June 15th, and that you're not using state funds or state employees' time as match. So you cannot match state funds with state funds, for example, and that includes bonds. Also, I understand that I will need quotes to include with my application to match my budget. So again, they want to see that you're not just pulling your numbers out of your hat, that you actually have a quote or something that will show them that you have done your due diligence to be, again, prudent with those funds, that you know that they're necessary expenditures to complete your project. And again, I know, again, this seems so simple, but it is so important that your project clearly fits the themes of the Heritage Area Management Plan, 5-year goals, and has clear heritage tourism value. It's extremely important. And again, if your project is an event or festival, that you're introducing a new event or adding a new component to an existing event, that's also very important. Okay, so I ended a little bit early. I wanted to put up my contact information. You can certainly email me, feel free to call me. We can talk about any project ideas that you have or that you're considering. I'm certainly happy to. And if anybody would like to submit a chat, or I can unmute everybody if everybody's comfortable with talking. If you have any questions right off the cuff after listening to the presentation, I'm certainly happy to take those now, and we can discuss anything. So if you want to type a note in the box, I will be keeping an eye out, or if you would like to talk, I can certainly unmute. Just shoot me a little note there in the chat and I'll unmute you. So I hope, I know it's a lot of information to digest in just a very short amount of time, and I hope I wasn't going too fast. And I hope it really did spur a little bit of creativity, or, maybe just inspired you on certain projects that you may not have been considering, or if you were considering a project, that it really solidified that it would be a viable project, and that you're interested in potentially applying for a grant. So I'm not seeing anything in the chat box, so I'm going to wrap it up. Again, please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. I'm here to help. I'd be happy to in any way I can. And again, I will have the webinar available on YouTube. So if you really want to hear me talk again, I know you do, you can certainly go on and listen to it again on YouTube. Or, of course, I will send you the PDF of the slides, and you'll be able to read back over those. If you have any questions, again, don't hesitate to reach out. And I hope you have a wonderful holiday, and we'll talk soon. Thank you, everybody. Bye.